Buonasera a tutti. Good evening and welcome to the Italian Radio Hour. Io sono Viviana and I would like to welcome back our regular listeners and also welcome any new listeners. Also, be sure to like us on Instagram and Facebook at the Italian Radio Hour and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on any past video interviews. Vorrei dare il benvenuto ai nostri ascoltatori da tutto il mondo. Grazie per essere con noi anche oggi mentre continuiamo il nostro viaggio per l'Italia e la cultura italiana. Well, on March 16, the Pittsburgh Opera will open a beautiful production of La Traviata by Giuseppe Verdi. And today we are going to have an inside look of the making and the producing of of La Traviata with acclaimed stage director Kristine McIntyre. But stay tuned in, a little pubblicità. Parli italiano? Do you want to learn, improve, or master your Italian? Istituto Mondo Italiano can help. Located in the heart of Regent Square, Mondo Italiano offers small group classes and one-on-one private tutoring in person or online to help you learn Italian in no time. Visit us online at istitutomondoitaliano.org. Well, Kristine, welcome to the program. Long time no see, less than 20 minutes.
No, we had rehearsal last night. Brilliant.
Well, this is pretty exciting. So just, for a little spoiler on my end, I have a little pleasure, my whole minute of glory, to be a supernumerary in this current production. But I have to say that it's a true treat that I didn't even know what I was going in because the more the rehearsals are ongoing and see everyone at work, so seeing all the pieces coming together, it just enhances the experience that I wish everyone would have a chance to do at least once in their lifetime. But today I have you for at least a good half hour to really dive into what happens into making the opera. But before we get into that, let's not spoil all the fun yet. Let's get to talk a little bit about you, your background, how you got into this beautiful profession. If I understand correctly, you had a degree in English literature from Georgetown University, then a master's in theater from the University of Hull in England. And once in a while, it was like you were tricking me, tricking me here, because I was trying to figure out where you were from. And yesterday, you even surprised me with one additional piece of information. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I was born in Philadelphia actually, and my family, I'm Italian American because my grandparents are Calabrian and Sicilian. And I grew up, ho imparato a parlare come bambina e poi l'ho studiato un po' all'università. And so for me, it's always wonderful to be doing Italian language opera because it feels just like being home. We moved to California when I was about 8 years old, which was sad because there wasn't such an Italian-American community there. A little bit of one, but not so much. I went back to Georgetown to go to college and then to England. I did my junior year of college at Oxford, actually. And it was then, during my junior year, that I started seeing opera in a new way. I had seen a little bit of opera before, but in England at that time, there were theater directors who were directing opera and doing wonderful things with it, beautiful, intelligent productions that had real sort of theatricality, sometimes a little updated, sometimes a slightly new take, but they made the art form feel very fresh and alive. And I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. Mm-hmm. So I went back to England. I'll confess it was also because there was a boy. He was an actor in a show that I directed at Oxford. And I wanted to go back to England, so maybe he and I would get together. And I studied theater and opera there. And then he and I got married and we moved back to the United States. And I started...
It was a little fine. It was a happy...
I know, right, exactly. Not so operatic because it all ended well and we're still married. I went to work for the San Francisco Opera, and then I went to the Metropolitan Opera, and I was there for about 8 years, freelancing at the same time. All through this period, I've been directing here in Pittsburgh. I've actually done 12 operas here in Pittsburgh. And now I'm entirely freelance and have been for years and years. I live in Portland, Oregon. And I work all over the country, and it's a great joy always to come back to Pittsburgh and do opera and be in the Strip District. I kind of love it down here. I always go to La Prima Espresso, and the cookies are very good. I'm a huge connoisseur of Italian cookies.
Wonderful.
I like like it. I got some pizzelle the other day, the anise flavored ones, which make me so happy. So
So, talking about the operas that you have directed, also La Traviata itself is something that you have taken to Japan, right?
yeah, I used to direct the big Zeffirelli production at the Met, and we went on tour to Japan in, I think it was 2006, with Renee Fleming and Dmitry Arostovsky, Ramon Vargas in the cast. Right before that, I had directed it in the house at the Met with Angela Gheorghiu and Jonas Kaufman. It was actually Jonas's Met debut. So it's a piece I know very, very well. I've directed other productions of it and my own production of it. So it's really nice to come back to it because now I haven't done it for about a decade. And it's lovely to come back to something with a little more wisdom and a little more stagecraft and get to have fun with it.
Well, it definitely seeing you in action, so to speak, you can clearly see how you kind of want combine the kind of the boundaries of theater, dance, just everything blending. And you were also the founder and artistic director of a company in San Francisco, Everyman. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've done theater my whole life. I started out doing theater as a kid, in middle school and high school and college. And I always thought I would be a theater director until I went to the opera. And I thought, what's this? This amazing art form that combines my love of music, because I play the piano. I sing, but not well. But I've always been a musician. And so this idea that I could tell stories through music and through visual imagery on stage and also use dance and other kinds of physical theater, it's this aspect of opera that was so interesting to me, that it combines so many things and that it's so big, but at the same time, you can also make these beautiful, intimate moments.
Indeed. And it's so nice also to see the complicity between Anthony Walker, the conductor, and yourself, as you are indeed during the rehearsals. So, but if I remember correctly, when it was asked whether you were interested in doing La Traviata, you kind of put a condition. You wanted to do a little bit your way.
Yes.
So I would like to maybe dive into certain elements, maybe even a little synopsis of the story, because we always take for granted that everyone knows what's going on. And there might be new opera goers. So we're taking our students, and some of them are aficionados, so some others are taking these as a new adventure. So maybe we can talk about the amazing character of well, we can talk about La Signora delle Camélias, the actual book that inspired the opera, and the true character that is named differently in the opera. So I'm going to let you take us on this journey.
Wonderful. Well, when Christopher asked me last year, I should just preface this with, I am somebody who spends most of my opera time doing new American opera. I've done Moby Dick and Dead Man Walking and lots of world premieres. And, for the past decade or so, this has been what I do. And I do mostly new productions as a result. So Christopher was a little surprised that I even was interested in doing La Traviata. And I said to him, okay, but as long as it is an absolutely correct traditional production and you let me do it my way. And he said, of course. And we actually had to go find a proper set of costumes that were set in 1848. So La Traviata is the story of a courtesan of the demi-monde. So these are women usually who were noble women who had something kind of bad happen in their past. Somehow they've been jilted in love, or maybe they had an unplanned pregnancy or affair, something that has happened. And so they are down on their luck, but still these members of this elegant society. Violetta is one of these courtesans. And in the first act, we're at a party in her apartment, and her best friend Gastone comes up and says, you've got to meet this young man. His name is Alfredo, and he's been pining after you for a year. And she can't quite believe that anybody has been pining after her for a year, but sure enough, it turns out to be true. And by the end of the evening, she's given him a camellia, which is her signature flower, and asked him to come back when the flower has wilted, which is a very kind of beautiful gesture. And of course he does. And in the second act, then it's a few months later, they've moved to the country together so that they can be alone, have a little privacy. And everything seems to be going very well, except Alfredo's father suddenly shows up, and he's very angry about this relationship. And he says to Violetta that she must break up with Alfredo because it will ruin their family. And he browbeats her terribly into it. And eventually she agrees. She understands that in this society, their relationship is unacceptable. And so she agrees that she will do this. And of course, when Alfredo finally comes back, she tells him that she will be outside in the garden, but she secretly writes him a letter. And by the end of this scene, the letter has been delivered and he realizes that she has left him, that she has gone back to the Baron who had been her lover and patron before Alfredo. In the second scene of Act 2, then, we're at a wonderful party, a masquerade that Flora is throwing. And both Violetta and Alfredo show up at this party. And of course, there's fireworks and terrible things happen. And by the end of it, Alfredo has acted very, very badly and insulted her. And he's thrown money at her. And the Baron has challenged him to a duel. And it's all very sort of hot and heavy.
And I could feel the sparkles last night.
Yes, no, I mean, it's an incredible scene. It's sort of Verdi at his best. In Act 3, then, it is again several months later. Alfredo, meanwhile, has had the duel. He survived, but he's had to leave the country. And Violetta is dying of tuberculosis by herself in the apartment. Alfredo does come back, but it's too late. And even though the lovers are united, she dies and he is utterly distraught. So that's the setup. Now, the interesting thing for me is that it's an opera we think we understand and know about. And we, at first glance, it seems much like any other Verdi opera, but those of us who know this piece well know that it is written very differently than other Verdi operas. It has some big chorus music and some of the other things that sort of characterize Verdi, but it is much more intimate. There's a lot of conversation. It feels like a play that has been set to music, and of course, that's because it is a play that has been set to music. It's based on a play and originally a novel by Alexandre Dumas fils called La Dame aux Camélias, The Lady of the Camélias. And it's extraordinary because of the fact that it was based on the life of a real woman, a real courtesan named Marie Duplessis. She lived in Paris in the 1840s, and she was beautiful and witty, and she had great taste, and men adored her. There was nobody who met her who did not want to be with her. And this included Alexandre Dumas fils, who was at the time a very young writer in Paris, and they had a very hot and heavy 15-month love affair together. Then he wrote her a very beautiful and very sad breakup letter because he knew that he couldn't really afford her, and she knew he couldn't afford her either. So she let him go, but he never forgot her. And he, unlike Alfredo, did not make it back in time to Paris for Marie's death. He made it back in time for the funeral. And then he went to this amazing auction of all of her possessions after she died. And this was a real event that many people in Paris went to. Charles Dickens actually was there and wrote a little preface about this event where all these sort of elegant society women went to see how this famous woman had lived, and people went to just buy a little piece of her life. It's a little bit like the way that maybe people want to buy something that belonged to Marilyn Monroe. Or I saw in November that one of Princess Di's dresses had sold for a record amount of money. It's exactly this same phenomenon of the way we need to possess something of these women. Now, at this same time, extraordinarily, how this relates to Giuseppe Verdi is Giuseppe Verdi was living in Paris with his mistress, Giuseppina Strepponi. Strepponi was a famous soprano, and she had starred in some of Verdi's early operas, and the success of early Verdi is largely, as a result of Strepponi's artistry. But by the 1840s, she had retired from singing, and she moved to Paris to start a music school, and she was doing very, very well. And Paris, of course, was a very free place with very different moral standards than the rest of Europe. And Verdi and Strepponi could live together in Paris, unmarried, freely. Mm-hmm. And this was wonderful for them. Now, Verdi tried to take her home to Busseto in Italy. And of course, his family freaked out and they were terrible to Giuseppina. And she was completely ostracized. So she went back to Paris and Verdi joined her there. So while Alexandre Dumas fils is mourning the death of Marie and writing the novel and then writing the play, Giuseppina and Verdi are living in the countryside right outside of Paris. having exactly the same, essentially parallel life. And legend has it that when the novel was published, Giuseppina Strepponi read it, recognized elements of her own story in it, and sent Giuseppe Verdi a copy of it with a note that said, "This is us." Mm-hmm. And then when the play finally was produced in 1852, Verdi and Strepponi were in the audience and saw it. It's the only opera that Verdi set during his lifetime. And I think the difference is these are people that he knew. This is a story that meant something to him personally. And everyone who saw the play, everyone who saw the opera would have known something about Marie Duplessis. She was that famous. So it's an extraordinary case of life imitating art and art imitating life, and this immense back and forth that just makes it feel like something very, very different and very special. You know, they say that artists should write what they know. Well, this was Verdi writing what he knew. And I thought it was an extraordinary opportunity to kind of remind us of this history, because it's so easy to forget or to not pull together all of these connections. And yet in the 19th century, it's one of the few examples we have of this. And maybe for today's listeners, it doesn't sound like such a big deal. Of course, writers have experiences and incorporate them into, you know, their art. We're so used to this with novels and plays and movies today. But I cannot tell you how unusual a thing it would have been in 19th century opera for this to happen, and that we have the ability to take this story apart in that way. And maybe with a little something that I've done, indicate it to the audience in a way that I think gives it kind of a new perspective.
And also when the opera first came out, and again, it debuted at Teatro La Fenice, at least for what I was able to find that Verdi wrote to his friend, because there were some, I don't know if it was really well received at the very beginning, but he says, La Traviata last night was a failure. Was the fault mine or the singer's? Time will tell.
Yes, I know this statement. I mean, it wasn't a success right away. People didn't quite know what to think of it. It was so modern. It was just people talking to each other. There are very few arias compared to other Verdi operas, you know, these kind of set pieces that we're used to. This opera doesn't feel like that. This opera feels like something that could have been written yesterday. And I think the original audience, when you feel something like this, when you experience art that is really new and fresh, sometimes you don't know how to react. And I think that was very much the case. But very quickly thereafter, people figured it out. And then it was a huge triumph for him.
So before we move on to the next topic, just a few words from our sponsors. Un caffè, per favore. My first cup of coffee sets the tone for my entire day, and I get my coffee at La Prima Espresso. La Prima has been brewing Pittsburgh's best coffee for nearly 35 years. Try any of their in-house roasting varieties of beans from all over the world at home, or come and enjoy an espresso or a cappuccino at any of their locations, where their friendly baristas and familiar faces will make you feel at home. Visit laprima.com to get La Prima Espresso coffee at your door. Applying for Italian citizenship? Need documents, translation? Istituto Mondo Italiano provides certified translations and assistance services. Be sure to visit us at istitutomondoitaliano.org and schedule your free consultation. Well, maybe we can also touch upon in general how certain operas are well or poorly received at the beginning, and what censorship might do to the operas, because I think Verdi wanted also to do casting different people, wanted to do certain things, but he was not really allowed to do so.
Censors got in his way throughout his career. We know this. They were terrible to him. He was so forward thinking. He was a very, very modern artist. But that got him in trouble. And as I said, it's the only opera where he set it in his contemporary period, in the 1840s, 1850s. But the censors didn't want that to happen. They thought that was too risque, too outlandish. And they insisted that the costumes had to be older. Mm-hmm. And so in his lifetime, Verdi never got to see La Traviata as he conceived it. Mm-hmm. It only happened after his death. So it's a wonderful thing to now be able to do opera, you know, however we want to. And for me, this means actually properly setting it in 1848. But I feel badly for Verdi that he never got to really see it as he envisaged it.
So, and definitely, obviously, La Traviata lend itself to so many other productions, not just opera, but influence movies and many other things. But let's dive in a little bit about our your production here in Pittsburgh. A little bit also what type of I don't know what areas or what other hints in the music the listeners the opera cameras should be paying attention to, because they're going to lead us into something else. So key moments, or again how your vision will take us into that living room and all that action that we will be seeing unfolding.
Great. So we'll talk about the bit that you're actually in, your starring role.
My 30 seconds of glory, and don't ask me to sing, otherwise the theater will.
No, it's perfect. Wonderful. So many Verdi operas have an overture. This one really doesn't. It has just a short prelude. But even in the short prelude, Verdi introduces some of the musical themes that we'll hear later in the opera. And one in particular, there's this glorious tune that we will hear in this prelude, and then Violetta will sing it to Alfredo in Act 2, Scene 1. And it famously goes with the words, "Amami Alfredo, amami quanto io t'amo." Love me as much as I love you. However, in the prelude, I've given it a slightly different gloss, because we've actually staged the prelude as the auction. If you remember, I just said that there was an auction of Marie's things after her death. And I thought it would be very interesting and maybe very beautiful for the audience to see a little bit of this. So imagine that the curtain goes up and there are supers on stage, you're one of them, of course, who are gently buying the things that belonged to this woman. And in walks Alfredo. So Violetta's been dead now for maybe several weeks, and he tries to buy one of the objects and does not succeed. And then he buys some letters. And this is really what happened for Alexandre Dumas fils. This is what he bought when he went to the auction. And Alfredo buys the letters and takes them away a little bit, and standing downstage left, on this love theme, he suddenly opens the top letter and he remembers what it felt like to be in love with Violetta. He remembers the entirety of their affair. And so essentially what it sets up is this idea that the entire opera is a memory of his, a flashback. I think that because of Alexandre Dumas fils' connection to Marie and Verdi's connection to the story and to Giuseppina, that this isn't necessarily how the women in the story would tell their story. It's how the men are remembering the women. You know, we often remember the things that we've done to people. I think this is one of those things where in the middle of the night, what do you think about? You think about regret in your life, right? And we always regret the way that we've hurt the people that we love. And I can imagine both Alexandre Dumas fils and Verdi himself having these feelings of regret for the way that the women have been treated. And for me, Traviata is just full of this sense of regret. And there are actual moments of regret that Alfredo has, famously, after he's thrown the money at her. There's this amazing aside that he has. He's just sort of leaning against a table and he says, "What have I done? The way that I've acted, how I've hurt her." He can't believe what he's done. Very human reaction, very understandable. And the opera is kind of filled with these little moments that I think are so beautiful and really indicate how much Verdi felt passionately about the story. Now, I should say that his and Giuseppina's story had a better ending than Violetta and Alfredo. A few years after La Traviata premiered, Verdi and Giuseppina were married. And they were married for 38 years, and it's very clear that she was the love of his life, and they lived very happily. They went back to Italy together, and there are sort of wonderful photographs that you can find of the two of them together with all the family gathered round. And so she got her happy ending, which I think is wonderful. And I've always wondered whether maybe the experience of writing Traviata and thinking about what could happen might have just made Verdi propose and realize that what he owed her was to marry her. It's the one thing he could do for her that would change her fortune and that would change the way that people looked at her. Mm-hmm. He valued his freedom, but something about this made him perhaps decide that I better do this so that Giuseppina and I can be together for real.
Mm-hmm. And so let's also talk about your directing. We have a wonderful cast. If you want to mention some of the members of our Violetta, our Alfredo, and Nina, so they all have their own personalities. And as I said, I was just mesmerized yesterday. I could have left when we were dismissed, so to speak, but it was a true treat, and I was so into. Even because I have to say the rehearsals are probably kind of the realm, but even, I don't want to say more authentic, not because on stage it's not authentic, but you see as things are getting the little tweaks, you notice everything and you give clear instructions, and then you see the scene being done again with that movement, how trigger the different reactions from the other members or emotions or mood and everything. So you're really paying attention to everything.
We have a wonderful cast. Almost everybody has done their parts before, but not too much. And that's always my favorite is, the schedule here is a little on the quick side. So it's good when people come in. Opera singers always come already knowing their music. They have to, because we only have a couple of weeks to put it together. So our soprano is Vuvu Mafuku. She's done the part recently. She had a big success doing it at Seattle Opera, and she had done it in Cape Town, which is actually where she's from before that. Duke Kim is a wonderful, rising young Korean-American tenor. I've known Duke since he was a young artist, and it's been really great to watch him grow into his voice and his artistry, and to have him in this. I had just directed him last year. He was in my production of Don Giovanni. He was a wonderful Don Ottavio. And so it's really great now to have him as Alfredo. I think this is a role that really suits him because he has this authenticity and this freshness. You really kind of believe that he's a little country boy from Provence who's fallen in love with the Parisian courtesan. We have Michael Chiodi, a very famous and well-established American baritone, singing the role of Germain, Alfredo's father. Michael has done the role many times before, but he's been very generous and open in embracing the ideas that we've had in this production. A lovely supporting cast of young artists from the Pittsburgh Opera. This is one of the great resident artist programs in America, and so it's wonderful having a bunch of them in the show. A couple of other people that are sort of luxuries for me to have: Leah Heater as Flora. She's a very lively Flora. Flora is one of my favorite characters because she gets to do more than anybody else, and she's very, we would say, cheeky in Britain. She's always got an opinion about everything, and she lets everyone know it. And Verdi and Piave, Francesco Murillo Piave, the librettist, give her some wonderful lines. She's the one who gets the real zingers, right? And then Oren Gratis, who I had years ago here in a cast of Nozze di Figaro. He sang Figaro for me. It was such a luxury to have him come back and sing the doctor, which is it's a great part. He doesn't sing a lot, but you really want somebody that has a certain kind of gravitas to it, the role, and I think Oren brings that really nicely. So we're having great fun. It's a fairly large cast of principals, and they all need to know exactly what everybody else is saying. It's really one of those operas where it feels like the first 4 minutes are like directing a play. And it's so funny. Some parts of this opera go very quickly. The first 4 minutes take me an entire 3-hour rehearsal to set up. It's crazy how much time you can spend doing all of these tiny little reactions. But as you saw last night, it's wonderful because everybody is there and in it, and Verdi and Piave have done such a marvelous job of really making something that feels like a drawing room comedy, but with sort of spectacular music behind it.
Wonderful. And so as a stage director, do you also contribute, and as I say, I don't know personally, to also the design of the set?
This production is not new. It's a rental. I think the physical scenery is actually owned by Utah Opera. When we do new productions, though, that's exactly what directors do. We lead the design process. And so for this, it's been more about coordinating elements. We decided to use different costumes in Utah. So I helped go out and find a set of clothing and then curate the look so that it was appropriately beautifully 1848 and all of the little details. Just today we were starting wig fittings because we have to do wonderful hairstyles for 1848. And so I've been consulting with James Geyer, our wig master, about the look of that. So I think it's fair to say a stage director controls everything that you see on stage. And eventually, when we get into the theater next week, I'll work with Marcus Dilliard, the lighting designer, to make all of the light cues be, tout a punto, exactly as we want in that moment. So it all starts in my head, and at some point, other people have to come and play too.
Well, also you're doing some other initiatives on social media, because that's also a way of attracting new people, or just kind of you have released, I believe already, a video that talks about our real character, the
Yep.
story that you have told
So
us.
I've made 4 chapters. The first one is called Marie. The second one is called The Letter, which is about the breakup letter between Alexandre Dumas and Marie. I don't think they've released that one yet. These are still to come on Instagram, but we've done the first one already, Marie, chapter 1. Chapter 3 will be the auction. And you can have a listen or a watch of that and find out more about the way that Marie's things were auctioned off and what Alexandre Dumas bought. And the fourth one, I just finished it this morning and gave it to the Pittsburgh Opera, is about Giuseppina Strepponi, the real life model in Verdi's mind, I think, for Violetta. So 4 little chapters, 4 little reels on Instagram that give some wonderful visuals. If you want to see what these people looked like, we've got some wonderful portraits and other things. And I talk a little bit about all of this, the concept and the background history, just to give people a little, foothold into the real history. I think on the website, there are also some program notes that I wrote if you're not so into social media, but if you want to just read what I've written, I talk a little bit about the same things.
Wonderful. So I want to also remind the dates and the times of the performances, and also give a discount code to all our listeners to come and enjoy any of the productions. The opening night is going to be Saturday, March the 16th at 8 p.m. Tuesday, March 19th at 7 p.m. And that is where all the students of Istituto Mondo Italiano will be in the audience. If I am correct, the same night, there is going to be both a pre-opera talk at 6 p.m., which is always very informative. And then after the production, there is going to be a meet and greet, which is also a very nice opportunity to meet with either members of the cast or maybe yourself. I don't know who is scheduled to come down. Friday, March the 22nd is going to be at 7:30 p.m. and Sunday, March the 24th at 2 p.m. All our listeners, friends, and followers, you can use coupon code POIMI, think about Pittsburgh Opera, Istituto Mondo Italiano, to get 50% off all the tickets on any productions. We really want to see everyone coming because, again, the opera and it's always been such a strong component of not only the Italian culture, but obviously, there is not probably a mother or a father or someone that, at least my mom, waking me up wouldn't sing any of the little pieces and everything. So there's always been an attachment, so to speak, to this beautiful art form. It's very complex, and again, being able to see some of the aspects from the insider, as an insider, just enhances the experience even more. And anything you will transmit, I will transmit to my students so that they can kind of catch those little moments. Kristine, this has been a delightful conversation. Is there anything else you would like to add, or something else you were working on? Anything?
I was just going to say that if you've always been opera curious, as we say, but you've never kind of dipped your toes in the water, La Traviata is the place to start. It has a wonderful story, and it's not like one of those crazy operas that has sort of a strange plot, people you don't recognize, kings and queens and all of that. These are real people, a beautiful young cast, wonderful music. There are, for those of you who want to read them, there are super titles projected over the stage, so you'll understand every word, no matter how good or bad your Italian is. It's a great chance to come and practice and to hear it. And we're doing this sort of beautiful, authentic production. So if you want to see what this art form can do, this is a place to start. Come along. It's not that long either. This is one of the things. This is just flies by. And I think it's a wonderful place to start your opera journey.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time together is up. Il Big Ben ha detto stop. It is time for us to say arrivederci e alla prossima. We want to thank you for tuning in into the program. If you have any questions or comments, or if you have any topics you would like us to address, please contact us at theitalianradiohour@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Remember, if you or any of your family and friends have missed a prior episode or would like to listen to this episode again, subscribe to the Italian Radio Hour on YouTube or where you catch your favorite podcasts. I would like to thank my guests, Kristine McIntyre, our sponsor Istituto Mondo Italiano, and La Prima Espresso. Until next time, alla prossima, ciao ciao, and see you at rehearsal.